Bonjour à tous, bonjour au public. Merci beaucoup d'être
Well,
venus.
good afternoon. Thank you for sitting here this afternoon, for so many of you sitting in this room for the third roundtable. This roundtable on African canoes. My name is Pauline Adès-Mével. We are with four prestigious cartoonists coming from the entire continent. Nime, who has come especially from Algeria for Cartooning for Peace roundtable, and we're going to talk about the difficulties for cartoonists in Algeria today. Willy Zekid is going to tell us about his personal experience in Congo and in the Côte d'Ivoire, who has been exiled, a triple experience. He will explain to us how he does his job. Yemi comes from Ethiopia. Good afternoon, Yemi. It's quite also interesting to listen to Yemi regarding the current difficulties in Ethiopia today, namely with all the current tensions in Tigray. We have heard a lot about this recently, how to be a woman and a cartoonist. What are the specific difficulties in being a cartoonist today? And finally, Gado, who is going to talk about Kenya. He works for a major media, who is a witness of the current situation in Uganda and Tanzania for press cartoons. Kenya, which is a more democratic, more open today, nevertheless confronted to a number of difficulties. You will introduce yourself and tell us what brings you here. I would like to start this debate with Nime, who will have to leave us earlier because he has to be on a TV show. So I'd like to start with you, and you will tell us about your experience, because today in France we are quite familiar with the Algerian situation. We have heard a lot since February 21, 2019, since the uproar and the demonstrations. It's difficult for journalists and for press cartoonists to do their job. Please, Nime, tell us how is it different to be a press cartoonist? How far can you go in your cartoons in lampooning, in satire? What message you can express? And yourself, you've been sent to jail, recently sent to jail. You've spent a number of months in jail. It's important for you to witness, because after you were released from jail, you continued your work with the same courage. I think it is important for the general public today to hear about your personal experience. What does it mean to be a press cartoonist today in Algeria with President Tebboune, a constitutional referendum which has been very non-popular and very difficult situation for journalists and cartoonists? How is it? Good afternoon, everybody. I was a press cartoonist during for a newspaper called Al Watan, which is a counter power newspaper during the years of Bouteflika, the former president. I realized that drawing a president during Bouteflika era is not possible anymore. Not today. If you draw Tebboune, the current president, you're going to be sent to jail. You're going to be sentenced, even for this, even a bad comment on the web, a quick comment or unpleasant message. You are sentenced to jail very easily and quickly. regarding cartoons. I first started with the popular movement. I'm in charge of I like drawing the Algerian society, the way I look at it. When there was the popular uprise, I was reluctant. I was thinking we're going to do a revolution with our bad temper. It's going to turn bad sour. Eventually, I was surprised by the peaceful turn these demonstrations took instead. So week after week, I started drawing what I could see on the street, what I could see about the political situation. And the drawings and cartoons have been adopted on the social movements and used by the activists on the street. It's important because the message through your cartoons was that the movement was then there was a lot of repression. And then we're going to talk about the problems you have felt during the pandemic and over the last few years on the African continent. Did you get the feeling you were able to transfer different messages to make the outside more sensitive regarding YEVAC, regarding the political situation? Were you able to share? I want to tell you that Algeria still has closed borders, that you have 300 political prisoners in Algeria today. Some journalists are in jail, like the correspondent of TV5 French channel and Reporters Sans Frontières, and a number of these 300 journalists are sent to jail. There is permanent pressure on Algerian journalists. This pressure has been increased by the COVID-19, which has allowed the Algerian government to tighten, to stop communicating, and to the fact that people were looking at COVID and elsewhere. They have exerted their pressure on journalists. I'd like to know how press, cartoons, and lampoon drawings has helped you to communicate. Was it made easier for you? Not easier, not at all. Because when the pandemic started, the demonstrations were stopped, were banned, and the pandemic became the friend and the support of the Algerian government, as if there was a revenge from the power through COVID. So journalists were sent to jail one by one. As far as I'm concerned, for my cartoons, I transferred my personal feelings with those with whom I took to the streets in the demonstration. I was doing that for the freedom of speech, for the sake of freedom of speech. And then they came to visit me. They came to my agency in plain clothes. They took all my computers, all my PCs, all my equipment, IT. Well, they kept me up to 5 a.m. to ask me constant questions. The police was asking me, "You are a cartoonist, but where did you get your ideas? Is there somebody hiding behind you? Somebody..." Because a cartoonist just draws. I had to give all my Facebook codes. It took a lot of time, hours. And they said at the end, "We're happy there are not 10 people like you to interview." If there was some manipulation, instrumentalization behind in the background, they wanted to know who was giving me orders. But they were very hard with you, and there was a lot of repression against you, a lot of threats. It was the first time I appeared in court. And when I was sitting in front of the judge, I thought the judge would understand that I'm just cartoons. And the judge looked at my drawing and said, "Why do you care? Why do you draw these things?" So I thought, oh, this is going to be hard. So I was sent to jail, no innocence. So in Algeria, you're sent to jail first, and from there you have to prove you are an innocent. So I've spent 2 weeks, and then there was a court appearance, 3 months in jail. After the 3 months, you returned to your cartooning activity, profession. Yes, I returned. It took me some time to restart everything, and eventually I thought the real jail is not to be able to draw freely. We were not in the jail. It was under specific circumstances. I started again, but it led me to become more subtle, to get my messages across differently, to find another reading level, but to continue. It's a fight. When you live in Africa, in Algeria, it belongs to young people to try to change the thing. Through cartoons, you think you make the general public more sensitive, especially young people who do not buy papers, newspapers, but who nevertheless are sensitive to the case. In the beginning, I was writing in French only, a certain category of people who understood, but after a number of demonstrations, I thought I want to get in touch with more people, and I started drawing cartoons with no text, and it started growing because I started receiving messages. We don't like comics, but we love what you do, and continue drawing. Keep drawing. Please stay with us. And we're going to turn to Nime, because you don't belong to the same type of press cartoonist, because Nime, you are online media. Nime, you work on satire. It's a different environment. Can you tell us about your personal experience in Ethiopia? Yemi, your work as a cartoonist, only 10% of women are press cartoonists in Africa. Only 10%. It's another form of courage. Could you, Yemi, tell us more about your main activity? I know you are very strong online on social networks, and you deal with a lot of youth. Please tell us about the current political situation. We are awaiting political results, elections took place yesterday. The electoral situation in Africa is always an occasion to put pressure on journalists. And we will talk about the pandemic situation, the health situation. So, Yemi, it's your turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. For me, my background is architecture. I learned architecture, then I got to cartooning after learning this. But I've always been passionate about colors and cartoons. For me, I'm raised in a political situation in Ethiopia all of my life, where if you say something about the government, you'll be imprisoned. That's how I've been raised until I turned 20-something. So the past 3 years, as you know, there's a new prime minister called Abiy Ahmed. So when he came to power, things started shifting. Lots of journalists were freed, and the circumstances seemed to be getting better. So I started drawing a little bit political cartoon with a friend of mine who used to be a blogger. So that's how I started doing cartoons 3 years ago. It's very short. So before that, I will not dare to draw anything because it was not very comfortable. I mean, I would go to prison. So I didn't want to do that. So recently, the things I do are mostly with social issues that I work on. It's about women, kids. I usually work with NGOs within the country. So the things I usually work on are human rights issues, women, agricultural, educational, things like that that I work on.
Mais donc vous avez la capacité de.
Can you speak in English? Sorry.
Oui, so you're able to draw on various type of topics, but what if you represent the president? I mean, would you be in trouble? And Ethiopia is not known as being a country favorable for press freedom. So what would happen if you decide to draw the president?
Recently, like this past 3 years, it's okay to draw the prime minister. I have done that. It's fine. But you know, these days the problem that's happening in the country is we have been like oppressed so long that when you're allowed to say everything that you want to say, you don't really know what to say. It's like, yeah, we've been prisoned like 30 years almost. So when it's all open and you can say whatever you want to say, people started saying impossible things and they started offending each other. So then you don't know where to stand as a person who wants to express themselves. You don't really know where to stand. Do I draw this or that, or do I stand in the middle, just like you'd see in the drawing there? So and there is also the ethnicity in our country, which is very complicated. And as a society, we are a very secretive society. We don't really tell what we feel. It's not you just keep it to yourself. And in the middle of that, there is also ethnicity, there's religion. We are so religious. It's a very religious society that we live in. So you try to balance all this. And there's also so much grievance among the ethnic groups in our country. So you've heard there is Oromo, Amara. There we have like 70 ethnic groups. So you say, oh, which one do I represent? If I represent this one is going to be mad. If I represent this one. So the past 30 years has been the regime at that time worked so hard to divide the society with ethnicity. So they used it as a weapon to keep us divided so that we don't come together. At this point, everyone is sensitive about their ethnicity. So as a cartoonist, do I represent this one? Do I represent that one? It's a really hard situation.
So the red line is more the ethnicity than the other question or the political questions.
Yeah.
And as a female cartoonist, are you considered the same by your colleagues, and are you allowed to or considered? Do you get the credibility if you represent any topic, or is there still barriers for a female cartoonist in the country?
Personally, like from my experience as a woman, I honestly have not experienced any discrimination or anything. Maybe it's because we're very few in the country. Like as a cartoonist, we're very few. Like we're, I don't know, 6 in the country. So and that's also another point where, you know, when in France, you can see that cartoons are everywhere. It's a means of expressing yourself. It's very colorful when you go out in the city. But in Ethiopia, that's not the way it is. It's It's considered cartoons are for kids. Tom and Jerry is the thing that the people know. They're not taken seriously. Like they cannot be used to express serious issues. So part of the reason that I work with NGOs is that because NGOs, you know, they're from abroad, they understand the value of what cartoons are, and they can really be used to transmit like strong messages, even in a very subtle way, so that people can easily understand it. So as a woman, I have not really got any discrimination of any sort. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much. Willy Zekid, merci beaucoup donc d'être avec nous et de pouvoir aussi raconter.
Thank you for being with us and to share your personal experience. The issue of women cartoonists is something I would like to raise with you. Please, could you tell us your path all the way to exile, to Kenya, and let me remind people that you come from Congo, and you have spent a long time in the Ivory Coast. It's also important, and also the return of President Gbagbo today and pressure against journalists. Yesterday, during a visit of President Gbagbo in his native village, the situation in the Ivory Coast, and what about exile today, what type of message it helps you to share. I'd like to return to the previous roundtable. Willy from Tunis said we have to retain these young people to make sure those who want to leave and go abroad should stay. You have not been able to do that. Can you share your experience? Yes, of course. Let me return to what Yemi said just before. In Africa, I would like to say you need to understand that being a press cartoonist goes back to very few years. It's quite young and recent if you compare with Europe. In Africa, press cartoons bloomed during the 90s, very little time during the 90s. When the emergence of democracy in Africa, which has led to the creation of opposition papers, that's when press cartoonists blossomed. Before that, we had a unique political party. We had no right to criticize the regime. It's been only 30 years since cartoonists have had the right to express themselves. Politicians were not ready for this type of emergence, ready for cartoonists. It's like in the past they were used to say the last word, to be the only rulers. No pluralism. Pluralism did not exist before. Today, cartoonists have learned and active. In the case of Congo, Brazzaville, we have very few press cartoonists. Yet, in the beginning of the 90s, of course, we were, the power did not really enjoy our art, our expression. Very quickly, we were quickly targeted, blacklisted, and tagged. This is what happened to me. I fled Congo during the war. Several circumstances have helped me. My parents were politicians, so at one point, when the current chairman returned to power, went back to power, returned to power, there was a witch hunt. Those who had been collaborating with the past power that was losing the war were hunted, were running into trouble with the new political power. Under these conditions, I've left Congo, and my first destination was Côte d'Ivoire. And one day I received a message from a parent saying, "Leave the country, don't come back." I walked into the first travel agency. I said, "The first flight goes where?" It was a Monday, and the next flight was on Wednesday to Côte d'Ivoire. That's how I landed in Côte d'Ivoire. It could have been Bangladesh. That's how I landed in Côte d'Ivoire. By chance, I met the team of the newspaper, Cartoon Lampoon newspaper Beach. This is the paper Beach. I started cooperating and working with Beach in Côte d'Ivoire, and day after day, I landed in France. Today, I'm a self-employed cartoonist. So I have one foot here in France, one foot in Africa. I could tell my story, but it's a long story. We would still be here in the morning tomorrow, all night long. I'm the story of a migrant who's gone. I've migrated. I had no other opportunity. Because of the war in Congo, I landed here. I was happy in Congo. I had no reason to leave Congo, my country. And these political pressure and hunt against journalists was so bad that you had no other choice. Freedom of the press is theoretical. A number of countries are suffering from pressure, and the health crisis did contribute to strengthen to pressure, and the number of actions increased during the health crisis. We have data telling us that actions against journalists were 3 times more important between March 2020 and the end of 2020, the first 3 months of the pandemic starting in March, which have locked down the world, which have helped severe or strict regime to act against journalists that have been used. It's important to remember that today you can do all types of cartoons, or I can cartoon anything I like. Yes, I can draw anything on anything. Tell you the truth, I use a lot of self-censorship. An African president said this sentence, and it made me laugh so much. In most African countries, the freedom of speech is tolerated, but the freedom after expression, that is not guaranteed. So it's funny, it's well said. You have the right to speak freely. In Africa, there is no pressure, no direct pressure. But after you have opened your mouth, that the problem will start, and you have pressure on your family. In Congo, yesterday I'm living in France, but nevertheless, I get phone calls from the Congo Security Watchdog Authority to threaten me, to say that my drawings are not appreciated by the government. But I continue, keep working. In the beginning, when I started receiving this type of threat, I said, I'm not going to put my life at threat or that of my family because of a small cartoon. It does not make sense. So I stopped drawing for a long period. Then I met a team of Cartooning for Peace, and I realized maybe alone I was weak and fragile, but becoming a member of Cartooning for Peace of this gives me additional strength, new blood. I really feel like speaking freely, and I keep speaking freely because in Congo, lots of my friends say, that's great that you keep drawing, because if you didn't do it, nobody else would do it, because those who live in Congo don't dare doing it, because those in Congo are so afraid of repression and backlash that they don't dare drawing. So I enjoy this total freedom in France. I express myself freely here. I receive phone calls from friends, quote-unquote friends, and you say you drew that, but they all know where you live in Africa. Then I think, if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. So I'm responsible for that. So I have to do it. That deserves, people deserve my drawing. Maybe it's my personal viewpoint, it's my personal feeling. When I sit down to draw, I want to criticize this so that it's very, I think it's quite important. It's important not to be intimidated, not to let the political power exert pressure on you, because they can threaten you. What is happening to Nime in Algeria could retain or deter some of your colleagues. When you left jail, you have been discussing with some of your colleagues who had had cold feet during your jail time, and your colleagues have become more discreet, correct?
Well, clearly speaking, at the beginning of the revolution, there were many cartoonists in Algiers, in Constantine, and after my incarceration, I was used as an example. I think not many cartoonists after that did dare to go, you know. I think we should not minimize the risks, because in fact reality is different from one country to the other. In France, you might think, okay, you are going to receive threats, but we will continue. It's not going to go further than that. But it's not necessarily the case in Africa. I was quoting the example of a journalist friend. He was taking huge risks. He was denouncing things. He thought that was his job as a journalist in Congo. But he's not here anymore. He's dead. And he died in dramatic circumstances. I think realities are not the same. So I understand my colleagues in Congo who do not dare, because the risk is not to go to prison, it's to lose your life. And so, you know, it's not the same thing. In France, okay, you do a cartoon and the risk is what? That you are going to end up in prison. Well, sometimes more, you know, because we've seen that here. But sometimes repression is more violent in some African countries. Okay, and maybe we could talk about it with Gado, the notion of impunity in Africa, because you're talking about that colleague that disappeared in dramatic circumstances. We feel that, in fact, what is lasting is impunity, the fact that crimes against press, cartoonists, journalists are not being punished, and therefore the authorities are not sending that message that could deter some people to commit crimes. Now, what about the situation in Kenya, which is not so easy for journalists, this issue of crime impunity? Is it important for you, Gado, in your work? And could you please present your work and tell us the reasons why you have decided to draw in a big Kenyan media?
Yeah, I mean, the question of impunity is very important, because we consider that if the crimes are not punished, it will probably contribute to have some people attack journalists. So how is it in Kenya with this question of impunity? Do you think that the authorities condemn sufficiently the crimes or the attacks on journalists? And can you tell us what also led you to start drawing in the country and neighboring country, actually? And also, you work in a very big media, on the contrary of Yemi or Nime. So what it is like to work for such a large publication?
Yes, sure. It's also important to echo what my colleagues of Yemi, Willy, and Nime, that in most African countries you are guaranteed freedom of press or freedom of speech, but you are not guaranteed freedom after speech. Mm-hmm. So that's very important, in many African countries. In terms of the impunity in the East African region, I think Kenya has been slightly ahead in terms of free speech, because there has been a tradition of independent media houses for some time. But however, I think as I mentioned, earlier, we have seen those gains have been eroded, and a lot of that has been they've been taken away. So, for example, one of the things that has happened is that there have been a lot of threats and intimidation of bloggers, mm-hmm. and also journalists. There are a few cases now where bloggers have been taken, and imprisoned, put inside. One of the good things that has happened still, that there have been actually a huge outcry online, and that has been helpful. So again, one of the bigger challenge has been basically how do we protect the gains that a country like Kenya has gained over the years. Mm-hmm. The other area where the politicians and the political elite and the political administration have been very good is basically also to infiltrate the press. Mm-hmm. And so this for me is a bigger problem also, where they find ways of coercing journalists, buying journalists, and so forth, because that is also one thing that is always forgotten. And by that, they're able to suppress certain information, they're able to kill certain stories, and they're able to choose basically what should be published and what should not. Now, that is something that we have seen, more recently, especially now that Kenya is going into the election, mm-hmm. Next year.
In other terms, the propaganda.
The propaganda.
The way they just catch the media and transform them into propaganda tools.
Exactly, and also turn the media into supporting a certain agenda. Mm-hmm. There is a big issue going on now, for example, in Kenya, where you have the new constitution. The constitution, yeah. They want to change to change the constitution. There is going to be, we don't know, there is actually going to be a referendum. Now, this actually, we have seen the political class pushing this agenda, but luckily the courts have been steadfast, and there is actually a court going on in the Court of Appeal now. It was this document was rejected, and now the government has appealed. So that has been a very good thing. Now, to go back to the media, you find that the challenge for the journalists, it is not only the intimidation. The challenge is also this being coerced into because you have a traditional media that has been also pretty much coerced. So that is also something that is actually quite challenging. We haven't have had a lot of in the last number of years. We've not had a case in Kenya where we have had journalists being hounded out and killed. But we've had the cases in Tanzania where we've had a journalist who basically disappeared. There is actually that issue up to today. Azori Gwanda, he has not been seen. His case is still there. We have journalists who had to flee the country. In Uganda, you have actually issues where journalists have been harassed. There have been intimidation of the press. The last elections were a farce, whereby the opposition was literally bulldozed and totally intimidated. So if you are to look at the region also, what is important is that we have seen a trend whereby these, freedom of press, the index of freedom of press has been deteriorating and going backward, and this is actually it's a huge worry, so to speak.
Kenya is ranked 102 out of 180 countries in our index, while Tanzania is 124 and Uganda 125. So it's not. It's not good.
Exactly, it's not very good.
Kenya is a little better.
It's a little better, yeah, but it's not very good. And also, you can see that actually in Kenya, also one of the things is that they've been actually very formidable efforts to eat on these gains. Again, I think it's what is important is really protecting these gains. Now, personally, I just think I've been able to work very independently, even despite the challenges that I faced in my previous employer. I work with a very independent media. I am able to do lots of my work with the newspaper and to work very independently. But and if they don't, the newspaper doesn't feel like publishing, I can always put that online. Now,
and so we'll talk about online.
So a lot of drawings that don't find see the light of day, they find themselves online. But we are very few of that, and probably around 3 of us who work with newspapers. And so that is very limiting because, 3 just cartoonists in the number of, in the country of 40 million, over 40 million, it's actually, and with a lot of online outlets, that's not good enough. But also that actually, basically, it has actually created an atmosphere of fear. It has created, especially now that we are going into the elections. I think despite all these challenges, whenever I'm harassed, whenever it is normal to get threats and all that, but my newspaper can always back me up. But you don't have that with a number of other artists who work independently, who work as bloggers, who publish their stuff online, and that sometimes is a concern.
Yeah, I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think for Yemi and for you, very interesting that you mentioned the fact that once you are not able to publish in your media, then you have to shift to the online publication.
Exactly.
So for all of you, I think, Yemi, I think it's a question to raise also with you. The online publishing online is an opportunity for African cartoonists to send a message and to have their message read and known. But can you tell us a bit about the risk? The hate speech does exist. So how do you consider, Yemi and then Gado, the possibility of being online and publishing?
For me, this specific area, like the online, this time in Ethiopia, is a very, how do I say it? It's a very bad time for online news or on anything online, because like I told you before, like since there is new freedom in the country, people are saying whatever they want to say. They are finding out that online is also a way to make money. So they will say whatever they want to say for whoever is paying. They're not being sensitive about who's listening. And it's causing lots of problems. For example, once there was an opposition leader, and he said, I'm in trouble, so come get me. So everyone from the rural areas, you know that our society, 80% is they're farmers. They don't really know the truth from lie. So they just heard somehow, and everybody called each other, and they came to Addis Ababa, you know, the center. And there was problem with traffic. There was a lot of, so it's one guy who said, I'm in trouble, and everybody came, and there was a problem in the city, gunfires, all that. So I feel like in a society where people don't really know what's what, if I do it in France, people would be like, okay, let's balance this, what's really going on, and ask before they do anything. But in Ethiopia, we are a society of farmers, like I said. So it's really hard to differentiate what's what. And people are making advantage, or taking advantage of that, using it for their political gain. And another, that's fake news is really going on. Yeah.
It contributes to the polarization of the climate. It's probably also. I mean, when you mention the political climate, Willy, Zekid,
oui.
Vous vouliez dire justement, vous exprimer là-dessus.
Par rapport aux réseaux sociaux.
Yes, regarding social networks in Africa, I think it's an opportunity that a lot of cartoonists are taking advantage of, because press cartoonists do have the ability to express themselves without having to go through a newspaper, because going through a newspaper means a lot of constraints. You need a contract, and not everybody has that possibility. So social networks have opened the door to all those anonymous cartoonists who can express themselves more easily. In my case, for example, for most press cartoons on Congo, they would have been published nowhere. Opposition newspapers would not have dared to publish them, and the government media would not have published them either. So they have found their legitimacy on social networks. But the risk with social networks, once the cartoon is online, it does not belong to the cartoonist anymore. Anybody can take it, modify it, change the message, put it out of context, and then you could find Yemi's or Nime's cartoon on internet, and people would have deleted the text and put another text with their signature. So we do have other responsibilities with social networks, and we're not necessarily in agreement with those responsibilities, but we have to cope with this new media. So it is an opportunity on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are many parameters that we would need to frame a little bit more. So when you're publishing about Congo on social networks, are you being called upon, or does that contribute to that hate speech and polarization, what you're drawing? No. In fact, I'm trying to put myself in an appeasing approach. Like, there are things that I do not tolerate, so I'm going to denounce them, but I'm not going to insult anybody, you know.
Mais vous êtes invectivé pour,
No, of course, but are you being insulted for the type of message that you are conveying? Yes, sometimes, yes. Now, with those social networks, for the four of you, do you think that it's a way to raise an awareness amongst the young population? Do you think that young cartoonists can be encouraged to become press cartoonists? Because for the four of you, you've met some difficulties in terms of publishing, to find the right media to publish your work. In the case of Yemi, it was because of the political situation. But now, online publication on social networks, is it going to make it possible to send a message to the young population that it is possible to express themselves and to do that work? What do you think? Yes, clearly speaking, it is an alternative, especially for young cartoonists, bearing in mind that in Algeria, the majority of the press is being locked by the government, and if you don't say what they want to hear, they will not get any advertisement, so they are blackmailing them. And therefore, it's very difficult. There are 2 or 3 old cartoonists who are still working in the press. But I think the alternative is the web media, independent media. And people, whether they're young or the general population, will look online. When I look at the news, the 8 o'clock news, you know, we see like a new Algeria, and I look at my girlfriend and I tell her it would be nice to go and live in Algeria, the way they are presenting it. But in fact, there's a big gap between the TV news and the rest of it. Well, it's important to want to transmit and your experience of resistance and courage. It is inspiring for young generation. What about you? Yes, in Côte d'Ivoire with Cartooning for Peace, we have initiated a project called Let's Draw Peace and Democracy for calm elections. So we do have workshops in schools, and we meet young people and we explain to them the significance of freedom of speech, that their citizen commitment is very important. And originally, they didn't know what was the purpose. They didn't know how to express themselves, to give their opinions. And little by little, with the workshops, they do understand that their voice matters, that what they have in mind, they can tell others through a cartoon with respect, that you don't need to be able to draw very well to convey a message, that what matters is that you will convey a message, and they can do it on social networks. And therefore, we have created a community on internet with WhatsApp and Facebook, gathering all those young people. And they're sending messages on a regular basis that are being posted on social networks. And they've become real ambassadors of peace. And I think it has had a real impact on the latest elections in Côte d'Ivoire. Because rather than having like hate speech, you know, whenever there was a hate speech, those young people who had attended the workshops and their friends, they would come and they would try to calm things down and try to convey some messages through the press cartoons.
What also, you know, before the point escapes, I think, of course, like Yemi and Willy mentioned, that it's always the online platforms, they've become an alternative source of income for artists and so forth, and this has been good. But there's also one important thing that it's always forgotten, that, you know, certain African governments have also found a way of actually limiting the online participation. So in Uganda, for example, during the elections, the government basically did shut down
the blockage of internet,
exactly,
or
the internet. They, you know, in Tanzania, that happened. And we have seen that in many other countries, that where, you know, the online platforms whereby they are an alternative means of sources of information, they are actually also very vulnerable to these dictators and you know, autocrats that in especially in African countries. So that is also somehow a challenge that you know, many African countries are facing, because you can have your freedom of press all this time, but during this most crucial time, that they can shut it down and mess up everything, or just use that for their own advantage. For example, during elections,
of course,
a lot of
or before the election.
exactly. So they can actually basically, so that to make sure that, you know, probably information does not get transmitted from one area, or they shut down the internet. And if they do that, then they are always able to manipulate the results and things like that. So that's also a huge challenge that is there today.
And I was wondering, for the three of you, donc je voulais savoir, en fait, là, vous êtes
I was wondering, you are faced with your own difficulties in your own countries. Today, there are many consortiums of journalists sharing content to be more powerful.
And others, and so journalists feel stronger. They share the content and the investigation, and so they know that they can promote, publish more easily. Is it the same for you to see, when you meet other cartoonists? Do you feel stronger? Do you feel hearing the stories of others, because you come from countries, very different countries in the on the African continent? Does it make you stronger to hear and to feel a team? Gado.
Yeah, yes, I think for me it's I also feel very lucky that I'm also, you know, part and parcel of Cartoons for Peace. And when I had my troubles, you know, they were quick off the blocks to defend me and write articles, and I'm always very grateful for that. I think it's something that is very humbling. But I'm also aware that it's very difficult for my colleagues elsewhere. And so at the local level, it's important that probably there should be more efforts to make more efforts locally. For example, what Willy and Bish, what they're doing, that's something that is very important. That because you are instilling the culture of free press. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not about one person, two people, but you know, in France, for example, free press, despite all the challenges, it's a culture. Mm-hmm. It's accepted across the country for centuries now. So I think that's also important, and I think there has to be efforts to try to do that with more within the local countries and local communities and local organizations, how to make sure that, okay, this actually is actually instilled and is understood across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yemi, what do you think about when you hear your colleagues' experience? And
for me, I feel very privileged to be among people that have passed through all this, because for me, I haven't, and I understand that people are paying a lot of price for it, and it's I can learn a lot from them. It's been very good experience for me because I can learn all of them. I can learn from all of them. Mm-hmm. And one thing I wanted to say before about the kids was in Ethiopia, there's a skill gap that is not filled because we don't have schools that teach cartooning. And when you tell people like there is, you can actually be a cartoonist and do this, do that. They are actually worried about how do I do it, because there is no school to teach them about cartooning. So that I wanted to mention.
I mean, here we have, of course, ways to get used to a cartoon and to meet, and the cartoonists come to schools, but there is no proper class on cartoon, unfortunately, as well. Et puis, avant, donc, Willy Zekid, je voudrais savoir aussi, vous vous sentez soutenu?
Willy Zekid, do you feel also supported through cartooning for peace or similar networks, listening to the experience of your colleagues? You feel it is important, this type of support? Yes, the work done achieved by Cartooning for Peace is remarkable and huge, not only in Europe but also in Africa. Huge impact, because the very first time that press cartoonists have met in Addis Ababa in 2019, it was under the with the support of Cartooning for Peace. It did help to meet, to exchange, to discuss, to get together, and to understand the opinion of others, to understand the reality of our very different countries, different realities. I do believe it is this type of gathering. This type of gathering is absolutely useful, beneficial. We get to learn from each other. We hear about the difficulties colleagues are confronted with in their various countries. It's quite important to do that. There's something missing in Africa. There's something is missing in Africa, the lack of similar organizations gathering cartoonists that would deal with local problems or regional problems in Africa. This is missing in Africa. Maybe Cartooning for Peace has triggered something that might evolve in that direction or move in that way. I think it's going to happen sometime. This is the call made by Willy to develop local initiative of Cartooning for Peace. Before we close, we're going to take questions from the room. We're going to ask people if they have questions to raise. Anybody with a question for our cartoonist?
Oui. Alors, je vais traduire. Mr. is the representative of media in Benin, and was saying that he appreciates a lot this event, and he says that as a paradox in Benin, it's possible to draw some satirical drawings, but the press is under pressure. So he wanted to mention, and actually a number of journalists in Benin have been jailed last year for quite a while, so he wanted to mention the fact that being a cartoonist or being a journalist who draws satirical drawings in Benin is more easy than being a journalist. And merci beaucoup, monsieur, donc de ce témoignage.
Thank you very much, sir, for your testimony. Quite interesting. I want to tell the general public that the picture is not dark everywhere. You have more open and countries, and some are harder than others. In Benin, cartoon is quite easy. Same thing with in Côte d'Ivoire with Bitch, the newspaper, Bitch. The beach association varies from one country to the other, so one country to another. You have more or less freedom based on the political leaders or the government. So the cartoonist is not threatened in all Europe, African countries. There are still some countries where people love to laugh. Freedom of press, published by the Reporters Sans Frontières. Somalia, Egypt are in the black, but most of the countries are in red, which is very bad in terms of press freedom. We have a problem in the countries in red and yellow. There is a source, there is some hope, but I know there is a clear deterioration. And some countries are doing better than others in terms of press freedom.
Alors, je vais reprendre votre question de façon à ce que les traducteurs puissent la traduire pour Yemi et Gado. Donc, monsieur faisait référence au fait que
the gentleman was referring to the fact that there are pressure against journalists in Africa, but less cartoonists who are in jail or getting arrested. The question remains, like in Benin, do cartoons share a message? Is there a capacity to interpret such that the message is considered to be less dangerous? How can you explain the fact that press cartoonists are not doing too bad eventually? It's paradoxical because there are cartoons which are extremely, among others, which are extremely provocative, sharing very strong messages. Do you also get the message, the feeling that cartoonists are slightly protected? Yes, saying that there are less cartoonists in jail or under threat in Africa, I would say it all depends. In how many press cartoonists? How many press cartoonists? In Congo, only two of us, two cartoonists. In most African countries, as I was saying before, being a cartoonist is quite recent. We are not tens of thousands of cartoonists. The number of press cartoonists in Africa in certain countries is quite limited. After all, that explains why. There's also the issue with self-censorship. In Congo, a self-cartoonist is going to use a lot of self-censorship more than if he was outside, but the number of cartoonists should be part of the balance. Gado, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think Willy has also explained it very well, that you know, so if you are to put, you know, the numbers in terms of whatever, you also don't have as many cartoonists. Forget about even the duration that editorial cartoonist has existed, but even the numbers also, it's not compared to journalists. That is also a challenge. But also you find also in some instances also in many African countries is that the threats sometimes are very subtle. You know, so they are not necessarily, you know, they are very subtle and very much more for known and probably prominent artists and who work in the press. Sometimes that happens, that you know, you get to hear when somebody is interrogated and so forth. But also the threats sometimes for cartoonists, they are very subtle. And the bigger problem is also for artists to find these platforms, because then just that hurdle of getting to these platforms is also a big challenge. And as Yemi also explained earlier, you find that you know, there are also other new challenges online also. But what is always for me important, number one, is also always, just like in many other countries, cartoonists are always still regarded in many ways as the barometer for press freedom. You know, even in many African countries where there are issues, still that they are regarded as a barometer, and that's very important, because normally, you know, whether in Tanzania or Kenya or Uganda, is that when you know that when cartoonists are harassed, then that is actually it raises a red flag. So that's actually a very important indication that, you know, we should always remember, you know.
What Nime was saying about...
Exactly,
yeah.
You know, that is always something that, that when it happens, then you know that there is trouble. But again, you know, the subtleties in terms of how governments approach, and it must be said also, you know, politicians in Africa, you know, they work 24/7, you know, to find means of suppressing the press. So they are also very busy trying to figure out how to suppress the press, whether it is actually buying the press, whether it is actually using brute force, whether it is actually coercing and paying for that. I think earlier Nadia has mentioned something, a philosophy that I share with her of actually keeping politicians very far, because you never know what, you know, what they're going to do with you, you know, or what they're trying to how they're going to try, you know, to how they're going to coerce you, and you never know with that. So it's there are different ways that they are that are being used to intimidate and to suppress free press, not only use of brute force, but there are also other very subtle ways that they are being used.
Merci, thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question? Et puis,
any other question? If not, no, we are, yes. I don't see any more questions around, so we're going to call it a day, put an end. Thank you very much for your testimonies, quite interesting, highly diversified. You have called the call for July 2nd for the press cartooning in Africa. Hope this call will be heard widely. Thank you very much again.